Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world so strange and uncomfortable, it's practically a horror show. Picture this: the 19th century Victorian mansion, where the ceilings are high enough to make you feel like a mouse. The walls are so thick you could get lost in them, and the only thing keeping you warm is the constant threat of fire. Welcome to the world of Victorian living, a time when your personal hygiene was a game of chance and your breakfast might give you dysentery. Before we dive into the absurdities of life back then, take a second to like, subscribe, and leave a comment, but only if you actually enjoy the absurd ancient weirdness I'm about to walk you through. Also, tell me where you're tuning in from, because it's always 2 a.m. somewhere, right? Now dim the lights, turn on a fan, and get cozy. Maybe even tuck your feet in. After all, there's no telling what might be lurking beneath the bed. Here's a question for you. What would it feel like to wake up in a Victorian mansion? Is it as grand as it looks in the movies, or does the grandeur just mean more drafts and bigger spiders? How long could you survive without indoor plumbing? How many layers of clothing would you need to not freeze to death? Would you make it through the endless nights without being driven mad by the smell of boiled cabbage? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up in a Victorian mansion. It's the year 1850, and the only thing warmer than your room is the pot of boiling water they're about to throw on your bed to freshen it up. Let's begin. You've just opened your eyes, and the first thing you notice is the cold, damp air. It's almost as if the house is alive, breathing around you, albeit a bit like a sick person on a ventilator. You're in a bed that feels like a collection of rocks wrapped in fabric, and the only source of warmth is your own body heat. And that is until you realize you've just been sleeping with a family of bedbugs. The clock? A loud ticking contraption that hasn't seen oil since the French Revolution, and you can bet it's going to wake you up at 4:30 in the morning, whether you like it or not. Welcome to the Victorian morning routine, where nothing starts without an existential crisis. Before you even think about sitting up, let's talk about that bed. It's made of the finest materials the Victorian era has to offer. A wooden frame, maybe a little wobbly from years of use, and a mattress stuffed with something that might once have been soft, but now feels more like a sack of hay that's been lying in the rain. The sheets? Likely to be coarse, rough, and capable of scraping your skin off if you're not careful. And as you shift in the bed, you feel something moving beneath you. You stop. Is it a mouse? No, it's worse. You're sharing your sleeping space with a family of bedbugs who are all too happy to remind you of their presence with a few enthusiastic bites. You can't help but wonder, did the Victorians ever know what it was like to sleep without the constant sense of dread that their bed might be an ecosystem in its own right? Now, as you lay there trying to wake up, you hear it, the clock. It's that horrible ticking sound, louder than anything you've ever heard. It's a wall of noise, and it feels like it's coming straight for you. This is no ordinary alarm clock. Oh no. This thing is a medieval torture device designed to ensure you get out of bed on time, or at least be annoyed enough to never go back to sleep. The clock hasn't seen oil since 1776, and it shows. It ticks and talks with the relentless persistence of a drill sergeant, keeping perfect time in a way that's almost offensive. It's loud enough to wake up the entire house, which, by the way, is probably full of people who don't want to be awake either. But you have to wake up, because that's just how it works in this world. It's 4:30 a.m., and the sun is still having a lie-in, but you're already wide awake, fighting the urge to pull the covers over your head and pretend you've somehow slipped into another universe where 4:30 a.m. is illegal. Unfortunately, that's not an option. You sit up, rub your eyes, and wonder if this is all a fever dream. Surely no one could possibly start their day like this. Yet here you are. The house is eerily quiet, aside from the ticking clock, but that only lasts until someone, somewhere, starts coughing loudly in the next room. You can hear the creaky floorboards as they shuffle around, and you realize that at least 5 people are awake, all probably feeling just as miserable as you. And then you hear it, the sound of someone getting up to freshen up. Freshen up? In this house? Sure, if by freshen up you mean splashing your face with cold water from a pitcher that's probably been sitting there for hours, possibly with a layer of dust on it. In the distance, you hear the ominous sound of a kettle being placed on the stove. The idea of hot water, glorious, life-giving hot water, feels almost like a distant memory. You wonder if you could trade your soul for one warm bath. It's a thought, really. You push it aside, knowing that you're likely going to have to settle for a quick wash with freezing cold water, which is absolutely not going to help your mood. But as you shuffle out of bed and try to stand, you immediately regret it. Your legs feel like they haven't worked in years, and the cold, creaky floor beneath you is unforgiving. The house isn't exactly the most comfortable of places to exist, and it seems like every step you take is a reminder of how poorly constructed everything is. You have to wonder, did anyone ever get a full night's sleep here? Or was the entire Victorian era just one long series of sleep-deprived mornings? It doesn't help that your eyes are still adjusting to the dim light, or what the Victorians would have called daylight. The windows are too small to let in any real sunlight, so you're stuck with whatever weak glow the world is willing to provide. You squint, but there's no point. The clock is ticking, and the day is already on top of you like an overbearing mother-in-law who insists you eat breakfast at 6 a.m. sharp. But hey, that's just the way it goes. You get up, grab your dressing gown, which of course doesn't have any pockets, and prepare yourself for another day of surviving Victorian life, one discomfort at a time. The clock, of course, doesn't care. It's time for breakfast, and you may be hoping for a warm, hearty meal. But don't get too excited just yet. The breakfast options in a Victorian mansion are, let's just say, limited. You're about to eat something that looks like it was stolen from a medieval plague victim's leftovers. Will it be cold porridge, moldy bread with a splash of butter that might be a little more maggot than dairy? And don't forget the tea, which isn't quite tea but a dark brown liquid that's more about caffeine and survival than enjoyment. And you thought your morning coffee was bad. First things first, the bread. Oh, the bread. It's probably been sitting around for days, maybe even weeks, in some dark, unventilated corner of the kitchen. It's dry, it's hard, and if you hold it up to the light, you might notice that it's suspiciously more gray than brown. But you know what? This is the Victorian world, and if you're lucky enough to have bread, then you're already ahead of the game. So you take a slice, or perhaps more accurately, you attempt to break off a slice using only your bare hands, because knives, unlike bread, don't get brittle with age. A little bit of butter might get slathered on top, but let's be real, it's more of a suggestion than a reality. The butter has been sitting out for so long, it's practically a solid state of itself. You might even spot a bit of a fuzzy coating on it, but it's probably nothing a little elbow grease can't fix, right? You brave it, and bite down. The crunch isn't from texture, it's from the lack of moisture. You might wonder if you've just bitten into the last remnants of a prehistoric fossil. But that's breakfast, Victorian style. You chew and swallow, because this is the only food you'll get until your midday meal, which is a joke of its own. Next up, the porridge. Now, porridge in the Victorian era isn't the creamy, comforting bowl you might imagine. No, it's more of a sad, gloopy mess of what might be oatmeal if it were to have a serious identity crisis. It sits there in your bowl, gray and congealed, like a sad little lump of cooked sadness. You stir it, and it seems to stick together in defiance of any attempt to make it palatable. The spoon sinks into it, like it's trying to escape, but it knows better. The heat is almost non-existent, and you wonder if it's been sitting around long enough to qualify as an antique. You raise a spoonful to your mouth, and the smell hits you. This isn't a warm breakfast aroma. It's the smell of something that's already begun to ferment before you've even started eating it. It's fine, you tell yourself. At least it's food. But your stomach is already giving you mixed signals. Your brain is hoping you won't regret this by mid-morning. Spoiler alert, you will. And then there's the tea. You know the Brits love their tea, but what you're about to drink may challenge your loyalty to the concept entirely. This is not the refined, soothing cup of Earl Grey you might imagine. No, this is tea in the Victorian sense, dark, bitter, and as far removed from anything that could be considered enjoyable as humanly possible. It's a brown liquid that's more about caffeine than comfort. A drink brewed not for its taste, but for its ability to wake you up and prepare you for another round of survival. It's less of a beverage and more of an existential cry for help in liquid form. You bring the cup to your lips, and the taste immediately confirms that no one is going to win any awards for this batch. It's harsh, it's burnt, but it's caffeinated, so it might just keep you alive until noon, when the next round of misery begins. The worst part, there's no escape. You have to eat this, because if you don't, you're just going to be hungry all day, and the only thing worse than that is the thought of having to go without. You glance around the table at your fellow Victorians, who are all somehow managing to choke down their meals without looking like they're about to keel over. Maybe they're used to it by now, or maybe they're just pretending it isn't as bad as it looks. After all, no one ever complained about the porridge out loud. There was no room for complaints in Victorian society, at least not without being judged for it. So you push through. You swallow the dry bread and the questionable porridge. You drink awful tea, and somehow you survive. As you finish breakfast, you can't help but wonder, how did anyone ever get through a day in a world like this? Was everyone perpetually hangry? You stand up from the table, stomach slightly unsettled, but knowing that somehow you've made it through the morning. You survived breakfast. Congratulations. Now it's on to the next challenge, the rest of the day. Bathing in the Victorian era isn't a spa day. No. You've got a metal tub, likely shared with half the family, and a fresh dip in the local river, which, let's be real, is more swamp than spring. Ever tried to scrub your armpits with cold soup? That's your reality now. Let's talk about how these folks washed up when even soap wasn't a given, and running water was more of a suggestion than an option. Your bath is more like a Duncan Prey situation, where the idea of cleanliness is more about surviving the smell than actually being clean. First, let's address the bath itself. The Victorian tub is far from the luxurious, bubble-filled jacuzzi you're imagining. No, this is a heavy metal contraption that you have to drag in from another room, or if you're lucky, maybe even lug out to the backyard if you're feeling adventurous. You'll be sharing it with multiple people. That's right, your bath time is a family event. The concept of personal space hasn't been invented yet, and privacy is something reserved for the wealthy. So while you sit there in the scalding water that barely covers your knees, you'll likely hear your cousin muttering in the next room about how she can't scrub the grease out of her hair, and your brother complaining that he's sure he found a frog in the river water. That's the vibe. Speaking of water, let's talk about the quality of it. In theory, you'd think that water for washing should come fresh from a spring, or at least a well-maintained source. But no, not in Victorian times. The water you're using has probably been sloshed around in a bucket for a while, maybe gathered from a local river or even a nearby pond. Picture this. Your bathwater is most likely filled with algae, small twigs, and whatever other creatures happen to call the water home. If you're lucky, you won't have to deal with the smell of a stagnant creek, but who are we kidding? The local river is more swamp than spring, and if you dip your toe in, you'll feel something slimy squirm between your feet. Not exactly the refreshing experience you had in mind. But hey, there's no turning back now. You've got to get in and wash off that grime, because let's face it, a day in Victorian society without a bath is just a one-way ticket to becoming the social outcast. So you lower yourself into the metal tub, the cold water shocks your system like a slap in the face, and you begin the process of scrubbing, if you can call it that. Soap, if it's available at all, is often a luxury. And when you do have some, it's probably not the rich, fragrant bar you'd expect. No, the soap of the Victorian era is more like a rock-hard lump that smells like whatever leftover scraps were mixed together in the factory. It's gritty, and trying to lather it up is about as effective as using a brick to clean your skin. Now let's talk about hygiene. You know how today we're all obsessed with cleanliness? We shower daily, use shampoo, scrub our faces with all kinds of fancy products, and enjoy the convenience of running water. But in the Victorian era, hygiene was a bit of a joke. Ever tried to clean your body without soap or running water? It's like trying to clean your kitchen with a spoon and some wishful thinking. You'd scrub your face, hoping to feel fresher, but the water only makes your skin more cold and irritated. The best you can hope for is to wash off the layers of dirt and sweat that have accumulated on your body, and even that's a challenge. And don't get me started on the freshening up process. For women, this usually involved a quick dip in a bucket of water, followed by some gentle patting with a cloth, at least if they were lucky enough to have one. The rest? Just hoping the smell of body odor didn't give you away as you trudged through your day, trying to avoid social embarrassment. And for the men, well, they might have gotten a little more of a rinse, but the general vibe was still, just do the best you can with what you've got. If you're hoping for a true cleanse, you can forget it. The idea of fully washing your hair or scrubbing your body with any sort of efficiency was at best an aspiration. By the time you finish this so-called bath, you've probably been cold and uncomfortable for longer than you'd like to admit. You look in the mirror, or rather the faint reflection in the window, and sigh. You don't look any cleaner, but hey, you don't smell like yesterday's fish anymore, so that's a win. But there's no time to dwell on it. You need to get dressed in whatever layers of fabric you've managed to assemble. And as you pull on your stockings, your shoes, and your corset, which is really more of a torturous device than a garment, you might briefly dream of a world where you could hop into a hot shower with all the shampoo you could ever want. But not today. Today, you're Victorian, and it's all about getting by with whatever scraps of cleanliness and comfort you can muster. Getting dressed in a Victorian mansion is less about fashion and more about survival. Think layers, lots and lots of layers. You've got a corset that feels like it was designed by the Spanish Inquisition, stockings that pinch your toes, and boots that might be a size too small, but hey, at least they'll help you walk through the snow without frostbite. It's cold, it's uncomfortable, and you'll probably need help getting out of it at the end of the day. And for some reason, no matter how much you layer, you still feel like you're about to catch a chill that could turn into pneumonia by the evening. First, let's talk about the corset. This is no simple undergarment, my friend. Oh no, this is a torture device that's designed to make sure your organs stay in their rightful places while leaving absolutely no room for your lungs to expand. It's tight. It's restrictive. You might even wonder if the person who invented the corset had an unhealthy relationship with control. As you pull the strings tighter, it feels like someone's trying to squeeze the life out of you, but this is just the price of Victorian beauty. And let's not forget that this piece of clothing was worn all day, not just for a few hours, but all day, every day. If you think your waistline looks snatched in modern-day waist trainers, just imagine trying to breathe with that level of pressure for a solid 12 hours. At the end of the day, you'll be happy to peel that off, but your body will still remember what it felt like. The corset was built to last, and so was the ache that came with it. Then we have the stockings. These aren't the silky, delicate accessories you may picture today. No. Victorian stockings are more like a mild form of foot prison. They pinch your toes in ways you didn't think were possible, and the elastic barely holds up, meaning you're constantly adjusting them throughout the day. The lace might look elegant, but you're too busy trying to ignore the aching in your feet to appreciate the aesthetic. You'd think they were designed to make you feel like a graceful lady, but instead, they ensure that you're stumbling around, constantly readjusting or wincing with every step. And don't even get me started on the garters. If you thought the stockings were bad, just wait until you have to deal with those. Now, let's talk about boots. You would think that the Victorians, being so obsessed with layers, would have come up with shoes that were at least a little comfortable. But no, these boots, probably a size too small and a size too hard, are meant to be worn as a statement of I have money and I'm willing to sacrifice comfort for it. The soles are stiff, the leather is unforgiving, and they give you blisters with every step you take. You're supposed to wear them, of course, but your toes will definitely let you know just how much they hate this idea. And yet, they do their job. They help you walk through the snow, which in a Victorian mansion is not an easy task. You might slip on the icy floors, or worse, you might get frostbite. But at least you'll look like you belong in the 19th century. Just, one with an intense desire to get out of these boots. But it doesn't stop there. Oh no. Now that you've managed to squeeze yourself into all these uncomfortable garments, it's time for the outer layers, the dresses, swim coats, and shawls. You think you're done, but no, now you get to wear multiple layers of fabric that weigh more than your entire wardrobe combined. The dresses are heavy, the coats are like wearing an entire sheep, and the shawls are wrapped so tightly around you that it feels like you're a mummy. trying to escape from a fashion show. You might even feel like you're trapped in a never-ending game of hide the warmth, where no matter how many layers you pile on, you can never quite get to the warmth you desperately crave. And let's not forget the hats. Every Victorian outfit was topped off with an elaborate, over-the-top hat that somehow manages to look both ridiculous and oppressive. Whether it's a towering bonnet, a lace-drenched extravaganza, or something that could only be described as a birdcage on your head, it's there, perched on top of your already warm, already uncomfortable ensemble. The weight of the hat only adds to the pressure of the layers beneath it. And while you may have spent hours getting dressed, you'll likely spend even longer trying to make sure the hat doesn't get knocked off in the wind. Or worse, at a social gathering where every little mistake is noticed. At the end of it all, you'll stand in front of a mirror, if you're lucky enough to have one, and take stock of your outfit. You'll realize that despite the layers, the discomfort, and the endless pinching, you somehow look presentable. The Victorian obsession with fashion was as much about survival as it was about beauty. The layers were there to protect you from the cold, to signal your social standing, and to make sure you didn't get frostbite on your way to the next dinner party. But the real challenge? Trying to make it through the day without feeling like you're suffocating or crawling out of your skin. As you head out into the world, you might wonder, is this what life is? A constant battle against discomfort, a daily struggle just to feel warm enough to survive? In the Victorian era, the answer was a resounding yes. But hey, at least you look good doing it. By now, you've probably realized that the food in Victorian England doesn't exactly scream gourmet. You'll have boiled meat, a lot of boiled meat, served with a side of potatoes that may or may not have started to sprout in the pantry. You don't get to pick what's on your plate. The plate picks you. Oh, and don't forget the pudding that could double as a doorstop, or the mystery of what's really in the soup. It's a daily gamble. Will today's dinner give you indigestion, or will you be pleasantly surprised by what might pass for a healthy meal? Spoiler, you're probably not going to be surprised. Let's start with the meat because, let's be honest, it's the centerpiece of every Victorian meal. Meat was a sign of wealth, or at least survival, so the Victorians went all in. The problem, though, is that the meat wasn't exactly prepared with a keen sense of culinary artistry. Picture this: a large chunk of boiled beef, probably a bit too tough, sitting in a pot that's been on the stove longer than you've been awake. Boiled meat wasn't meant to be tender or flavorful. No, it was supposed to be filling, which in Victorian terms means it could also double as a weapon in case of a dinner table brawl. The meat was boiled to the point where it almost becomes a part of the broth. And the broth? Well, the broth is another story. It's brown, it's salty, and it's usually used to mask the fact that the meat probably wasn't the freshest. You could chew through it for hours, but you're not sure if you're supposed to be eating it or just trying to avoid choking on the fat. Next up, the potatoes. Ah, yes, the humble potato. The one constant in every meal, a tuber of hope that might just save you from the culinary horrors of Victorian England. But don't get too excited. The potatoes are boiled, of course, and likely overcooked until they're limp and waterlogged. They might look like mashed potatoes if you squint, but there's no butter, no cream, no seasoning of any kind. It's just a sad pile of starchy mush that makes you wish you had an actual chef to sprinkle some salt on it. As for the ones that didn't make it to the table, Well, they were probably the sprouted ones hiding in the pantry, just waiting for their moment to shine, just not in the way you would have hoped. After all, nothing says gourmet like a side of boiled potatoes that have been around for too long. They might even be growing their own little ecosystem. That's right, sprouts. You're not just eating food, you're eating food that's trying to evolve in front of you. You could pull them off, but you probably won't, because you've been taught to be grateful for anything that even resembles sustenance. And then there's the soup. Ah, the soup, a Victorian classic, but what exactly is in it? The answer is, who knows? Victorian soup is an exercise in mystery. Is it a beef broth, perhaps? Chicken stock, maybe. Or did someone just throw a bunch of leftover vegetables, scraps of meat, and questionable bones into a pot and hope for the best? The ingredients are often a mystery, and the taste is just as confusing. It could be too salty or too bland, thick or thin, and you have no way of knowing until you've already taken a spoonful and started chewing. But don't worry, the soup will always be hot, which is good. One, because it's about the only thing in your diet that's remotely comforting. It doesn't matter if it's a watery concoction or a gloppy, unidentifiable paste. The important thing is that it's hot and it fills you up. Now, let's move on to dessert, or as the Victorians like to call it, the thing that's somehow worse than everything else. The pudding. This isn't your fluffy, sugar-laden, light as air kind of dessert. No, Victorian pudding is dense, heavy, and borderline inedible. If you're lucky, it might be made with a bit of fruit or spice, but more often than not, it's a block of solidified flour and sugar. Imagine a pudding that could double as a doorstop, but no one ever seems to mention how much it weighs. The texture is thick and rubbery, and your best bet is to cut it with a knife and pretend it's delicious. At least it's filling. And if you're feeling adventurous, you might drizzle it with something that vaguely resembles custard, though calling it custard is a bit of a stretch. You finish your meal, which, if we're being honest, was more about surviving the day than actually enjoying food. You sit back, belly full of boiled meat and potatoes, and wonder if you've just ingested a year's worth of nutrients or a year's worth of regret. But hey, at least you've made it through another meal without getting food poisoning, so there's that. The whole experience might leave you a bit unsettled, but the Victorians didn't care. They weren't looking for Michelin stars. They were looking for something that would keep them alive long enough to complain about their next meal. Ah, yes, the social scene. A room full of people who are all just as miserable as you, but at least they're trying to outdo each other in etiquette. The Victorians loved their rules, especially when it came to proper social conduct. Can you talk about the weather without offending someone? Are you sitting properly? Are you standing too close to the fireplace or not close enough? One wrong move and you could be an outcast, something that was hard to come back from, especially when there's nowhere to hide except for that horrible wallpaper. The first thing you'll notice when you walk into a Victorian social gathering is that everything is uncomfortable. There are chairs that look like they've been designed for statues rather than humans, and they're arranged in a way that makes it almost impossible to have a conversation without feeling like you're in a game of musical chairs. You sit, and immediately you're confronted by a sea of eyes, all judging you, all trying to figure out if you're worthy of their time. Will you be able to keep up with the conversation about the latest court gossip? Can you manage to comment on the weather without making a social faux pas? Better not mention the rain. Rain is for the lower classes, and as a Victorian, You're expected to pretend that you've never experienced anything but perfect sunny days, even if you've been caught in a downpour on the way over. Now, the conversation itself, oh, that's a minefield. If you want to survive, you'll have to master the art of small talk. And by small talk, I mean a constant back and forth of the most inoffensive, banal chatter imaginable. It's almost as though they were all trying to talk without actually saying anything. Compliments, of course. Your dress is lovely, but only if you mean it. And when it comes to questions, you better know how to ask without overstepping boundaries. How is your health? Is a perfectly acceptable question, but God forbid you ask about someone's personal life or finances. That's grounds for immediate exile. You'll spend most of the conversation nodding politely, pretending you understand the topics being discussed, all while trying not to spill tea on your lap or accidentally insult someone with your ignorant remarks about politics or fashion. And the worst part? The constant anxiety about posture. You are constantly aware of your body. Are you sitting up straight? Are you slouching? Are you making the right amount of eye contact? Should you be holding your teacup with your pinky finger extended? Or is that too over the top? The rules of Victorian social decorum are relentless, and if you happen to break one, say if you laugh a little too loudly, or fail to maintain the perfect neutral expression, you could very well become the subject of a whispering campaign. It's not enough to just be polite. You need to be impeccable in your presentation. The space itself is just as confining. Every room is meticulously arranged to make sure there is just enough space to walk without bumping into anyone, but not enough room to escape from awkward situations. The wallpaper is always awful, stifling patterns and colors that could only be described as desperate or anxious, designed to make the walls feel like they're closing in on you. The windows are small, so no matter how long you stand in front of them, you can't really escape the atmosphere of suffocating, forced civility. The lighting, too, is poor. Everything seems just a bit too dim, as though it's trying to hide some unspeakable truths. Of course, there's always the fire in the hearth, but you have to be careful with how close you get to it. Too far, and you'll be deemed cold and distant. Too close, and you risk looking like a person with a severe lack of awareness. Either way, it's a lose-lose. When it comes to food at these gatherings, it's just as calculated. Do you eat the fancy cake with your fork or your fingers? How do you drink your tea without looking like an uncultured animal? You're constantly being judged, even while your mouth is full of pastries you don't really want to eat. You've got to navigate through each bite carefully, making sure that you maintain your poise while chewing, swallowing, and maintaining the right facial expression. And don't even get me started on the quiet, polite discussions about your manners, or the lack thereof. I'm afraid you've taken too much of the cake, dear, someone might say, their voice dripping with sugar, while they clearly resent you for taking a second helping of something so decadent. As the evening wears on, you'll be exhausted, not from the physical effort, it's the mental gymnastics that get to you. Socializing in Victorian society isn't about being yourself. It's about being the right version of yourself. You're not allowed to relax, not allowed to let your guard down, because everyone is watching. One wrong step, and you might never be invited to another gathering again. Everyone is just waiting for that moment when you slip up, because they all know that no matter how hard they try to maintain their own sense of composure, they too are just as miserable as you are. The difference is, they're pretending to be happy, and you're pretending to believe it. Victorians knew how to have a good time. If by good time, you mean sitting around in a dimly lit room, staring at each other over cups of tepid tea while someone plays a song on a piano that might be as old as the house. Forget Netflix, since entertainment in the 19th century was all about avoiding boredom and pretending you weren't dying a little bit inside. Want to go out? Great. You're either walking down a filthy street in your ridiculous layers of clothing or going to a fancy dinner where no one actually knows what to say. Good luck with that conversation. Let's start with the house parties, or what the Victorians called gatherings, a word which, in this case, is meant to mask the fact that no one's really enjoying themselves. The setting: a candlelit room thick with smoke from the fire or the flickering lights of oil lamps. The air is stale, your lungs are struggling, and everyone is doing their best to pretend they're not silently suffocating. The walls are lined with heavy drapes that feel more like barriers than decor, and there's a piano in the corner, probably out of tune and playing the most melancholy music you can imagine. But hey, it's the only music, so you're stuck with it. Everyone's gathered around pretending to be interested in the sound of it, but the truth is, nobody really wants to be there. They'd rather be at home, sitting in front of the fire, eating boiled potatoes and silently cursing their life choices. Instead, they're trapped in a room full of people who can't stop talking about how they should be enjoying the evening, and that in itself is its own special kind of torture. As for the conversation, well, it's as awkward as you might imagine. The Victorians had a thing for polite small talk, but polite small talk in this context is just a glorified form of social paralysis. You're stuck in a circle of people, none of whom seem particularly interested in anything other than the food on the table, but everyone's too stiff to actually say anything interesting. You might start talking about the weather, which, let's face it, is everyone's fallback in awkward situations. But then you wonder, wait, is the weather too boring? Are they going to judge me for mentioning it? So you move on. Maybe you talk about the latest fashionable items of clothing, the new hats, or some new, very expensive wallpaper someone's had installed. This is the kind of conversation you're expected to have, and it's not just boring, it's practically an art form. So if you say the wrong thing, the whole evening could take a turn for the worse, so you carefully keep things shallow. No one is here to be real with each other, and frankly, it feels a little like a cruel game, where the only point is to avoid social disaster. Now let's talk about leaving the house. You decide to head out to enjoy the night, which in Victorian England is basically walking down a dark, dirty street, dressed in enough layers to make you feel like you're suffocating, while also dodging puddles and stepping on God knows what. It's cold, it's uncomfortable, and every step feels like a reminder that your life choices are both strange and deeply questionable. You might make it to a ball where the dance floor is packed with stiff bodies trying to pretend they're having fun. But surprise, no one is. There's a lot of shuffling about, trying to avoid the awkward who's supposed to be dancing with who problem, all while dodging sharp heels that might have been fashionable but are also just a way to make your feet scream in agony. If you're lucky, you might find yourself at a dinner party where you're once again confronted with that same stale conversation and the constant undercurrent of discomfort. The table is heavy with food you don't really want to eat, and the wine is watered down so that it barely counts as a drink. But it's the social rules you're more worried about. Will you say the wrong thing about the host's choice of candle arrangement? Will your poorly timed cough offend someone? Could someone have possibly noticed the gap between your smile and your actual interest? Dinner is long, drawn out, and full of painstakingly polite exchanges, with everyone just waiting for it to be over. If only you could escape without offending someone, you might be able to survive the evening. Instead, you find yourself hoping that someone will bring up the weather so you can finally say something safe again. As the evening drags on, you find yourself longing for the comforts of home, the heat of the fire, a warm bed, and the sweet silence of an evening free from the constant pressure of polite society. But you're not allowed that luxury. No, you're stuck here, pretending that these small, stiff interactions are meaningful when all you want to do is escape into a corner with a good book and a glass of something strong. It's a night out in Victorian England, and fun is a word that's as foreign as freedom. At least tomorrow, you'll have the chance to do it all again. At the end of it all, when you return to your bed, assuming you're lucky enough to have one that doesn't feel like a medieval torture device, you'll realize the most exciting part of your day was the walk home, where you could stretch your legs and pretend you weren't living in a society designed to crush your spirit with its rigid rules and endless politeness. You were out, but you didn't enjoy it. You didn't really enjoy anything at all. And yet, somehow, you survived. As the day winds down, you'll eventually stumble back to your room, which feels like the setting for an Edgar Allan Poe story. The bed is made of springs that are more like medieval torture devices. The blankets feel like they're made of stone, and the thought of getting under the covers is enough to make you wish you had just stayed in your chair all night. But alas, you must sleep, because tomorrow brings another round of questionable hygiene, boiled food, and awkward social encounters. Here's hoping you don't wake up to find that your bed has been commandeered by the rats again. First, let's talk about the bed. Imagine, if you will, that the bed frame is a heavy, solid wooden beast that looks like it could double as a coffin, one that's less concerned with comfort and more about just holding you in place while you sleep. But the real horror is the mattress. It's stuffed with hay, straw, or worse, whatever leftover fabric scraps were lying around the house. It might be the height of luxury at the time, but in the 21st century, it's a clear violation of your back's right to exist pain-free. Each spring in the mattress is a silent reminder that no one in the Victorian era really cared about getting a good night's sleep. Instead, the mattress seems more concerned with making sure you feel like you're sleeping on a pile of bricks. You might think that you could fluff it up a little to make it more comfortable, but that's just wishful thinking. A soft mattress didn't exist. The only softness you're going to get is the sort that comes from the painful hours of trying to find a position that doesn't make you regret your entire life. Now, the blankets. Let's discuss them. If you're expecting something soft and snuggly to crawl under at the end of a long, exhausting day, you're sorely mistaken. These blankets are thick, coarse, and feel as if they were woven by someone who hated both you and the concept of comfort. They weigh a ton and seem more suited for protecting you from a cold winter storm than for providing any kind of restful sleep. In fact, getting into bed under one of these feels less like preparing to sleep and more like being wrapped in a heavy, scratchy cocoon of misery. The fabric might be wool or some other unpleasantly rough material that makes every inch of your body ache as you try to get comfortable. There's nothing soft or gentle about it. These blankets are here to make sure you stay awake as long as possible, pondering the decisions you've made that led you to this moment of bed-induced misery. And yet somehow, you have to pull them up and try to sleep. Because what's your other option? Staying up all night, staring into the dark, hoping that your tiredness will eventually overwhelm your discomfort? Nope. The only thing left is to lay down and pray that you'll somehow drift off to sleep in spite of it all. You finally lie down, your body stiff with discomfort, and close your eyes, only to be reminded of the small, unsettling noises of the room around you. The floorboards creak, the wind howls outside, and you swear you hear something scurrying in the walls. But what's that? A rat? You shiver, but then again, that might just be the bed's springs making you twitch every few minutes. Either way, the thought of your bed being shared by rats is far from comforting. As the hours drag on, you might find yourself tossing and turning, your mind racing through all the oddities and miseries of your Victorian day. The food you ate, the social situations you survived, the endless layers of clothing that you'll have to wear again tomorrow. It's all too much, and sleep seems just out of reach, taunting you from the dark corners of your miserable existence. The moments when you do finally drift off are like sweet relief, but they're short-lived, interrupted by the pressure of the springs digging into your ribs or the feeling that you're being held down by the weight of the blankets. It's as though the bed itself is trying to suffocate you, slowly, painfully, and with the deepest indifference to your need for rest. Eventually, you might fall into a fitful sleep, but it's never a peaceful one. You wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, not sure if you've just had a nightmare or if it was just the oppressive weight of your surroundings finally breaking you down. You glance at the clock, or more accurately, the tiny sliver of light creeping through the heavy curtains, and wonder how many hours until you have to do it all again. Another day of boiled meat, another round of awkward social encounters, and another night of sharing a bed with something that's probably better off not being named. By morning, your body will feel like it's been through a battle. Your back aches, your arms feel stiff, and you may or may not have developed new bruises from trying to shift around in bed. But what can you do? You're Victorian. You endure. So you rise, and you do it all over again, because there's no other choice. This is your life now. Welcome to the Victorian nightmare of sleep, where the only comfort is the knowledge that it's a new day, and somehow you survived the night. But don't get too comfortable. The next round of discomfort is already waiting for you. So tonight, as you lie down in your soft, cozy bed with your heating on, clean sheets, and the luxury of a mattress that doesn't feel like a medieval torture device, maybe take a moment to think about the Victorians. They survived without the comforts we take for granted. No central heating, no soft pillows, no pleasant evening of TV or scrolling through social media to wind down. They endured everything from miserable meals to uncomfortable social gatherings, all while doing their best to stay warm and, most importantly, appear like they were enjoying it. Imagine the effort it took just to exist day after day. Boiled meat, scratchy blankets, and the constant fear of being judged for every tiny social misstep. They didn't get to relax in the same ways we do, and they didn't have the option to just call it a day when life got tough. Instead, they put on layers, literally and figuratively, and kept going, because survival wasn't about comfort, it was about making it through, and somehow they did. So next time you're tempted to complain about a rough day or a bad night's sleep, maybe pause for a second and remember that the Victorians were living through a never-ending string of discomforts, from their aching backs to their dreadful social obligations. They survived in conditions we might call intolerable, but they did it with grace. Well, maybe not grace, but certainly persistence. In a way, their hardships are proof of just how strong people can be when they have no choice but to keep going. As you drift off tonight, take a deep breath, feel grateful for the warm blankets and your modern comforts, and remember, life may be challenging, but at least you aren't sleeping on a bed of nails surrounded by rats. Tomorrow's a new day, and while it might have its own set of challenges, it's also a lot more comfortable than the life the Victorians had to endure. So get some rest, and may your dreams be free of spring loaded mattresses and rat infestations. Good night.